Blessings everybody, and welcome to StellarMace. Here to explain the meme I posted on Instagram, the whole Kievan Rus being bamboozled by a series of invaders. Jokes aside, that is the actual history of this region. Over a span of almost 3,000 years, almost every single culture living nearby looked at this place and thought it was some nice free real estate. One of the biggest contributing factors to that was this funny little thing called geografia. In this video, I decided to compile a series of shenanigans, that is the Ukrainian history, and show to you world builders an example of how geografia can significantly affect your world's history. For convenience, this video is split into two, just like the Roman Empire. This part would be observing all the people that came before the Slavs, and in the next one, we'll take a look at the Kievan Rus and what happened after. Before I delve into history though, let's first get an understanding of geografia. The region is notably cut in half by the large river Dnipro, which empties into the Black Sea. There are a couple of mountain ranges in the east, but the more notable ones are in the west, forming the large barricade that is the Carpathian Mountains. This is one of the few natural defenses that Ukraine has from its western neighbors. There are also the Pripyat marshes to the north, aka the Polisia, and in one of my videos I mentioned how due to its terrain being harder to invade, Polisia along with Carpathian Mountains have managed to preserve the more ancient local styles of embroidery. Down south, the Crimean Peninsula, jutting out from the mainland and surrounded by water, was also reasonably defensible for most of its history, although it wasn't really the ethnic Ukrainians that usually inhabited it. One of the most defining features of Ukraine, though, is its vast open fields. These have served not only to host a variety of equestrian cultures, but also extensive farming. This region is famous for its pitch-black soils, called Chernozem, which is one of the most fertile in the world. In terms of crops, Ukraine maintains one of the top outputs in Europe. Wheat covers the land in golden fields and made its way onto the national flag. Sugar beets and sunflowers are also important local crops. Meanwhile, the south, with its mild climate, is known for its vineyards. Apart from foodstuffs, Ukraine is also notable for its rich deposits of coal and iron ore. Some of the deepest coal mines in Europe are located here. During the Soviet Union, Donetsk served as the industrial heartland of the country. Despite receiving a minimum amount of funds, Ukraine supplied the most in terms of agriculture and industry. But unfortunately, that's where the blessings end. In the title, I refer to Ukraine as a drain hole of Europe, and in a way, that's actually the case. Apart from the Carpathian Mountains to the west and the Black Sea to the south, this region is pretty much an open field with hundreds of invaders sipping into it like flushing water. The rivers themselves are practically like highways leading into the country. They could be used to enhance trade, making your cities wealthier, but easily misused, they become traffic ways for invaders. On the southern tip is the Danube, which connects to the Central Europe. Rivers Dnipro and Don connect to the north, and for good measure, the river Volga, which is actually in Russia, has also supplied many cultures that got interested in a little conquering. All of these factors are completely outshadowed by the biggest geographic weakness, the Pontic steppe, i.e., the Pontic-Caspian steppe, i.e., the entire Eurasian steppe, practically a giant hallway for hundreds of tribes that can ride horses and fill in your body with arrows. Yeah, while many surrounding places served to build up powerful cultures, Ukraine was basically a boxing ring where they could all clash together. Let's begin. We don't really know who exactly came first, since at the time everyone who could write was down south, minding the whole game with the empires in the Middle East. But around 900 BC, we start getting reports of three cultures in the steppes, one succeeding the other over a period of 1100 years. They were all related, hailing from the Indo-Iranic genealogy, and had fairly similar cultures. They rode horses, herded cattle, and, raided the empires in their spare time. They quickly developed as fearsome warriors of the steppe. Although they did use battle axes, spears, and swords, their favorite weapon was the bow and arrow. They invented several different types of arrowheads to specialize for different tasks. Need a needle-sharp poison-tip arrow? They got you. Need one with barbs sticking out so it tears the flesh right off your bones as you try to remove it? They got you. More importantly, these people were responsible for introducing the composite bow, which was more powerful than anything seen before. First came the Cimmerians, settled around Crimea, which is maybe where we got the name from, who knows. In the 700s BC, they thought it was boring, so they busted their way south into Phrygia. The Phrygian king, Midas, committed suicide after being unable to stop them. Now the Pontic steppe was taken by the Scythians, which were more popular and more feared. They've managed to spread all over the Eurasian steppe, going as far as China. Although this is sometimes referred to as the Scythian Empire, these people didn't do much in terms of empires. They were rather a big conglomeration of independent tribes scattered all over, minding their own business. They didn't do much in terms of infrastructure either, being a nomadic people and living in mobile wagons. Herodotus considered that one of their strengths, actually. In 513 BC, the Persian king Darius marched 700,000 men north to fight them, but the Scythians constantly retreated, burning the fields and poisoning the wells. "Stop running and fight like men," the king would say, to which the Scythians replied, "Well, we have no cities or crops to defend. We have the graves of our fathers. Find these and try to destroy them, then shall you find whether we'll fight you." Fed up with this, Darius left home. Later on, around the 4th to the 3rd century BC, the Scythians would be replaced by their close relatives, Sarmatians. These were fairly similar, so not much to go on there. In the 2nd century AD, the Sarmatians would also disappear, being replaced by the Goths. No, not these ones. These were a Germanic people originating from the legendary island of Skanza, Scandinavia, and made their way south into modern-day Ukraine. One of the suspects for their migration is a change in climate that caused hunger in their homeland. How exactly they managed to replace the warriors of the steppe is a mystery. One of the theories is that the Sarmatians got a little tired of all the plundering and raiding and decided to get a garden. Now settled, they would be much more vulnerable to a battle-axe-wielding, war-hardened and hunger-stricken barbarian to jump out of the woods. Another theory provides that instead of conquering the Sarmatians, the Goths instead intermixed with them. Whatever the case, Goth came to the Dnieper River, thought it pretty cool there, and decided to stay. The Romans called them by two names. The Visigoth, or West Goth, were the ones west of the Dniester River. Meanwhile, the Ostrogoths, or East Goth, were the ones along the River Don. The Goths probably never identified themselves as either west or east, and it is possible they weren't even all pure Goth to begin with. What they did identify as was a constant pain in the Romans' neck. That pain was about to be increased tenfold, however, in the 4th century with the arrival of a new invader.
Who's that Pokemon?
So remember about the Pontic steppe and how it was practically a door left open to anything coming from the east? Well, in the mid-4th century, we got the Huns. Roman historians describe them as short, stunted people of the swamps, barely human, speaking in grunts. What the Huns did excel in was warfare. They would allegedly learn horse riding since the age of 3 and seldom be seen on foot. They'll be cut by a sword at a young age to learn how to endure pain, growing up fearless in battle. Special binders would be attached to their heads since childhood, causing their skulls to grow deformed and appear more scary. Fear was in fact one of their greatest weapons. Almost every historian described them as fighting like a whirlwind, charging in without notice, dispersing and gathering as one again, appearing and disappearing like a flock of birds. They used ranged weapons, throwing spears, casting nets over their victims and mauling them apart. The most important weapon would, of course, be the bow and arrow. One may think that fortified cities could stop them, but they quickly learned how to sack those and razed hundreds to the ground. Thousands of barbarian tribes poured through the Roman borders, being more willing to face them than the Huns. Thus the Huns caused what is known as the period of migrations, also known as the wandering of nations, when the entire European cultural setup was reshuffled. Then came Attila. Up until this point, the Huns were somewhat disorganized, every clan doing whatever they want. Attila united them all together into the Hunnic Empire and wreaked even greater havoc than was already done. He liked to sack Constantinople in his spare time and demanded heavy tribute in return for peace. It was very rare that he actually kept the peace, though, as it was obvious that he didn't fight for wealth or glory necessarily, but more for the sheer thrill of battle. It was only after his miraculous death that the Huns started to crack. You see, Attila had several sons, and whenever there's more than one, things go down. His sons quarreled with each other for power, causing internal fractures among the Huns. but the people of Europe were yet too afraid to rise up. It was the Gothic king Valamir, along with the Gepid king Alaric, both previously serving as generals under Attila, teamed up and drove off the Huns from their lands in 454. This sparked hope throughout Europe, and now every nation rose up against the Huns, clearing them off the map by 469. With that, harmony was restored to the continent, and everyone lived peacefully and happily ever after. Anyways, back to Ukraine. Before we get to the Kievan Rus, there are just two more people that swept the land, the Bulgars and the Avars. These two, similarly to the Huns, were also masters of the horse. The Avars were of Turkic origin, Turkic, not Turkish. You see, while the Huns were wrecking Europe in the west, in the east, there was this Roran Empire in the modern-day Mongolia. When it came crashing down in 552, many tribes went running in every direction, and one of them was the Avars, who fled west into modern-day Ukraine. The Bulgars, on the other hand, lived in Europe under the Huns, sharing their culture. They were originally thought to also be of Turkic origin, but more recent genetic studies had them linked to Central Europe instead. When the Hunnic Empire fell apart, the Bulgars went running east into the fields of modern-day Ukraine. Soon enough, the Bulgars and the Avars would crash into each other in 560s. The Avars were very similar to the Huns, and were sometimes even considered their successors. They fought furiously, but were lacking in terms of organization. And the Bulgars took advantage of that. In 650, Kurt, aka Kubrat, unified his people into Great Bulgaria. They would defeat the Avars, forcing them to flee west, and would rule the lands of Dnipro unopposed for a couple of years, until Kubrat died and his 5 sons divided the nation into 5 hordes, 3 of which were conquered by other people. One of the remaining 2 fled north to the river Volga, meanwhile the second fled west and settled right next to the Byzantine Empire. There they would found the First Bulgarian Empire in 681, which the Byzantines would take over, then the Second Bulgarian Empire in 1185, which the Ottomans would take over in 1336, and at last would become the Bulgaria that we know today in 1908. Let's hope no one takes that over. Now, dial the clock back a bit. We're back in the year 500 AD. Just 50 years have passed since the fall of the Huns, and the Bulgars and the Avars are yet to meet each other on the plains of Ukraine. It was around this time that Roman borders became disturbed by a new type of barbarian, the Slavs.